Why did you walk away immediately after seeing your wife sleeping with your best friend? That is the question many people asked me when I caught my wife cheating. But what I did next left everyone satisfied with the outcome. I'm Andres, 34 years old, and for 8 years I thought I was married to the love of my life. Until that Tuesday afternoon, when I came home early and found my wife Carolina in our bed with Diego, my best friend from college. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just stared at them as they hurried to cover themselves with the sheets I had bought just 3 months earlier. Carolina tried to speak, but I silently raised my hand. I picked up my keys from the nightstand, calmly walked down the stairs, and went out the front door. At that moment, they didn't know they had just signed their own sentence. What I had discovered weeks ago would make that moment of pleasure cost them absolutely everything. 3 weeks before finding them together, I already knew about the infidelity. I work as a financial auditor in a mid-sized firm, and my specialty is finding inconsistencies in accounting records. That ability to detect abnormal patterns wasn't just useful at work. When Carolina started coming home late on Thursdays, always on Thursdays, and her phone suddenly had a new password, my professional instinct kicked in. It wasn't hard to confirm my suspicions when I reviewed the statements for the credit card we shared. Charges at cheap motels, restaurants in areas where she never had a reason to be, purchases at lingerie stores she never wore with me. But what really shattered me was discovering who her accomplice was. Diego and I had been friends for 15 years. We were roommates in college, the best man at my wedding, the godfather if we had ever had children. When I found messages between them on the shared computer that Carolina forgot to log out of one night, I felt the floor open up beneath my feet. They weren't just romantic messages, they were taunts. They were laughing at me. Diego wrote in one. Poor Andres works so much he doesn't even notice what's happening in his own house. Carolina replied, it's better this way. He gives me everything I need financially. You give me what I need emotionally. That night, sitting in front of the lit screen while Carolina slept in our room, I made the most important decision of my life. I wouldn't confront either of them yet. I needed time to plan. I needed to make sure that when the hammer of justice fell, it would be with the force of a meteorite. For the next 3 weeks, I acted like nothing was wrong. I kissed Carolina in the mornings, chatted with Diego on weekends when he came over to watch soccer games. I smiled when she told me she had a meeting with her friends on Thursday nights, but secretly, I was documenting everything. I hired a private investigator who took compromising photographs. I downloaded and backed up every conversation, every message, every digital proof of their betrayal. I spoke with a divorce lawyer who helped me protect my assets and prepare the necessary documentation. I discreetly transferred funds to a new account Carolina didn't know about. I changed the passwords to all our shared accounts. I even spoke with the owner of the building where we lived, explaining that there would be changes to the lease agreement soon, which was only in my name. Carolina noticed some change in me during those weeks, but she attributed it to work stress. You've been very quiet lately, she told me one night at dinner. Is everything okay at work? I smiled at her and lied with the same ease she did. Just a complicated project. It'll pass. She nodded, kissed my cheek, and continued eating, probably thinking about her next meeting with Diego. That ability to feign normality while planning my exit surprised even me. I discovered that when you're deeply betrayed, you develop a coldness you didn't know you possessed. Diego, for his part, kept acting like the loyal friend he always was. He came over on Sundays, brought beer, we talked about sports and work while Carolina prepared snacks in the kitchen. Sometimes I'd see them exchange glances when they thought I wasn't watching. Other times, Diego would put his hand on Carolina's shoulder in a way that seemed casual, but I knew what it really meant. Each of those gestures fueled my determination. It wasn't just the pain of infidelity that motivated me. It was the humiliation of knowing I was the object of their taunts, their secret laughs, their complicity in making me look like a fool. The day I finally found them in bed wasn't a coincidence. I had planned it. I knew from the messages that they would have one of their encounters that Tuesday. I usually worked until 7 p.m., but I told my boss I had a family emergency and needed to leave early. I got home at 3 p.m., a time when I knew for certain they would be together. I went up the stairs silently, hearing the sounds that confirmed what I already knew. I opened the door to our bedroom, and there they were, wrapped in betrayal and wrinkled sheets. The look on Carolina's face when she saw me was a mix of horror, guilt, and panic. Diego tried to say something, but I just shook my head. There was nothing I wanted to hear from either of them. I picked up my keys and my phone. I calmly walked down the stairs while I heard Carolina screaming my name behind me. Andres, wait, let me explain. But there was no explanation I needed. I already had all the answers that mattered. I left the house and drove straight to my lawyer's office. It happened exactly as you said. I informed him when I walked in. He nodded with a serious expression and pulled out a thick folder with already prepared documents. So, we proceed as planned, he said. I signed the divorce papers right there. My lawyer would handle sending them to Carolina the next day via courier. But that wasn't all. We had other steps to execute, other moves in this chess game where I had finally stopped being a naive pawn. That night, I slept in a downtown hotel, a simple but clean room that felt more honest than the bed I had shared with a liar. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Carolina called again and again, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. Please, love, let me explain. It was a terrible mistake. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. Diego also tried to contact me. Bro, I'm so sorry. I don't know what got into me. We can talk about this. I blocked both numbers after listening to the first few messages. There was no conversation possible with people who had spent months laughing at me behind my back. The next day, while Carolina was receiving the divorce papers at home, I was at the bank closing our joint accounts and transferring everything to my personal account. Since I was the only real income in the marriage, all the money was legally mine. Carolina worked part-time at a clothing store, earning just enough for her personal expenses. I paid the rent, the utilities, the food, the car she drove, practically everything. When I closed the accounts, I knew exactly what that would mean for her. I also spoke with the building owner that morning, explained the infidelity situation, and showed him the lease agreement that was solely in my name. I need Carolina out of the apartment as soon as possible, I told him. He, an older man who had been through his own difficult divorce, nodded with understanding. I'll give her 5 days to vacate. He said, that's more than generous considering the circumstances. I thanked him and signed the documents that would terminate the lease at the end of the month. What Carolina and Diego didn't know was that my revenge was just beginning. I had been meticulous in my planning, and every piece was falling exactly where it should. Carolina tried to call me from different numbers over the next few days, but I had anticipated that tactic. Every time an unknown number appeared on my screen, I simply didn't answer. Text messages arrived by the dozens every hour. Andres, please, we need to talk. I made a horrible mistake, but we can get through this. I swear I'll end everything with Diego. You're the only one I love. You can't just leave like this after 8 years together. Every message I read confirmed I had made the right decision. There wasn't a single genuine apology among all those desperate words, only fear of the consequences. Diego also tried to contact me through mutual acquaintances. Our common friend, Roberto, called me 3 days after the discovery. Andres, man, Diego is destroyed. He says he needs to talk to you urgently. I replied with a calm voice. Roberto, did you know? There was an awkward silence on the other end of the line. Did you know my wife and my best friend were betraying me in my own home? Roberto stammered. I suspected something about a month ago, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to cause trouble, and I was wrong. I hung up on him without saying another word. The complicity of silence was almost as bad as the betrayal itself. On Friday, 5 days after leaving the house, the landlord kept his word. Carolina received the official eviction notice. She had 48 hours to leave the apartment. She tried to call him, to beg for more time, but he was inflexible. The contract is in Mr. Andres Romero's name, he explained. He has decided to terminate the lease and has every legal right to do so. You are not listed on any document for this property. Carolina finally understood the magnitude of her situation without access to the bank accounts, without a house, without the financial support I had provided for years. Meanwhile, I had begun to execute the second phase of my plan. Diego worked at the same marketing company where we had met years ago. We had been friends since we shared a tiny cubicle when we were both interns. I had been promoted to auditor at another company, but Diego stayed there, climbing the ladder to become an account manager. What he didn't know was that I maintained professional contact with several executives at his company, including the director of human resources, Fernanda, who had been a classmate of ours in college. I sent an email to Fernanda on Friday afternoon. Hi, Fernanda, I hope you're well. I'm writing to you in a personal capacity to inform you about a delicate situation involving Diego Salazar. I recently discovered he was having an extramarital affair with my wife. I'm attaching photographic evidence and messages that show some of these encounters occurred during work hours on company premises. I included the private investigators' photos that showed Diego and Carolina entering a motel on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. when he was supposedly in a meeting with clients. Fernanda's reply arrived early Monday. Andres, I'm deeply sorry for what you're going through. This information is very serious and requires a formal investigation. I'll keep you informed of the process, but I must warn you that this could result in disciplinary action against Diego. I knew exactly what that meant. The company had strict policies about professional conduct and misuse of work time. Diego had been lying about his whereabouts during work hours to meet with Carolina. That was grounds for immediate dismissal. Carolina, while packing her things from the apartment with the help of her sister Luz, finally got me to answer a call. She used Luz's phone, a number I didn't have blocked. When I heard her voice on the other end, I almost hung up, but I decided to hear what she had to say. Andres, please, just listen to me for 5 minutes. I'm begging you. Her voice sounded hoarse, probably from crying so much. 5 minutes. I agreed in a neutral voice, but it doesn't mean I'm going to change anything. I know I made the worst mistake of my life. Carolina began between sobs. There's no excuse for what I did, but we were together for so long I felt like I had lost my identity. Diego made me feel exciting again. He made me feel young. It was stupid and selfish. And I'm so sorry. I waited for her to finish without interrupting. When she fell silent, waiting for my response, I simply said, "Are you done?" She made a choked sound. "That's all you have to say, Carolina." I read the messages. I read all of them. You didn't just sleep with my best friend in our bed. You made fun of me. You called me dumb, naive, the idiot who paid all the bills while you had fun. How much of that was about making me feel exciting? The silence that followed was devastating. She couldn't deny what I had seen with my own eyes. That was just silly talk. It wasn't serious. It was all serious, Carolina. Every word, every taunt, every lie you told me for months, and now you'll have to live with the consequences of your decisions. You left me with nothing, she whispered. No house, no money, no access to our accounts. How am I going to survive? The question revealed exactly where her priorities were. She didn't ask how to repair the emotional damage she had caused. She didn't ask if there was any chance of forgiveness or reconciliation. She was only worried about her material well-being. You should have thought about that before betraying 8 years of marriage. I replied, you have a job, you have family, you'll find a way. Just like I'll find a way to live with the fact that the woman I loved turned me into a joke with my best friend. I hung up before she could reply. My heart was pounding, not from pain, but from something like liberation. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control of my life. Carolina would have to move in with her sister or her parents. She would have to explain to them why her marriage had ended so abruptly. She would have to face the shame of admitting her infidelity to the people who knew her. That social humiliation was part of the justice I was seeking. Diego, for his part, received his own devastating blow. On Tuesday, Fernanda called him into her office along with the company's CEO. They presented him with the evidence I had provided. Photographs with dates and times that matched unjustified absences in his work record, messages where he discussed meetings during work hours, the systematic pattern of lies about his location. Mr. Salazar, the CEO said in a stern voice, this company has zero tolerance for breach of trust and misuse of work time. You are fired effective immediately. Diego tried to defend himself, to argue that it was a personal matter that shouldn't affect his employment, but it was useless. The evidence was irrefutable. He had been lying to the company for months, reporting that he was in meetings with clients when he was actually in cheap motels with his best friend's wife. He gathered his personal belongings from his office under the gaze of surprised colleagues and walked out of the building where he had worked for 12 years. His professional career, at least in that industry where everyone knew each other, was practically finished. The news of Diego's firing spread quickly through our common social circle. Roberto called me again, this time with an accusatory tone. Andres, you were the one who got Diego fired. I saw no reason to lie. I provided truthful information to his employer about inappropriate conduct during work hours. They made their own decisions based on real evidence. Roberto exploded. That's pure revenge. Diego already lost his friendship with you. You didn't need to ruin his career too. My response was cold and calculated. Diego didn't just lose my friendship, he lost my respect, my trust, and any consideration I ever had for him. If the consequences of his actions include losing his job, maybe next time he'll think twice before betraying someone who considered him a brother. But the revenge I had orchestrated went beyond just leaving them without a house and a job. There was a third component I hadn't revealed yet, one that would hit where it hurt them most, their social reputation. For years, Carolina and I had built an image of a perfect couple in front of friends and family. She would post romantic photos on social media, host dinners where everyone saw us as the model marriage. Diego was seen as the loyal friend, the brother I never had, the perfect godfather for the children we never got around to having. That facade was about to crumble completely. I had prepared a detailed message explaining exactly what had happened, without vulgar details, but with enough information for everyone to understand the magnitude of the betrayal. I included a few screenshots of messages between Carolina and Diego where they made fun of me enough to show it wasn't just a romance that sprouted spontaneously, but a calculated and cruel betrayal that included deliberate humiliation. I scheduled that message to be sent to our entire group of close friends and family. On Wednesday at 8 p.m., when the message was sent, my phone exploded with notifications. Some responded with shock and immediate support. "Andres, I can't believe this. I'm so devastated for you." Others asked for details. "Is this real? Did Carolina really do that?" But most expressed pure outrage against Carolina and Diego. "They're despicable. What kind of people do something like that? I never want to talk to either of them again." The reputation they had both cultivated for years disintegrated in a matter of hours. Carolina's mother called me crying that same night. "Andres, I just read your message. I can't believe my daughter would do something so horrible. I'm so ashamed. Mrs. Patricia had always treated me like a son. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Patricia. I know this isn't your fault." She sobbed louder. "Is there any chance you two can fix this?" Carolina is devastated. She says she made the worst mistake of her life. I answered her gently but firmly. "Mrs. Patricia, your daughter not only cheated on me, she humiliated me, mocked me, and did it with the man I considered my best friend for months. There's no coming back from that." Diego's parents also found out, not from my message, but because the rumor had spread quickly. His father, Don Hector, had been like a second father to me during college, when my own family was far away. I ran into him by chance at a coffee shop near my new apartment on Thursday. He looked older, tired. "Andres," he said with a broken voice, "I have no words to express my shame for what my son did." I sat with him because the respect I had for him hadn't disappeared with Diego's actions. "Don Hector, you don't have to apologize for your adult son's decisions. I raised him better than this," the old man insisted. "I taught him about loyalty, honor, respect. I don't understand how he could do something so vile." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes people make choices that disappoint even those who raised them well. That's not a reflection on you." We sat in silence for a few moments before he asked, "Is there anything I can do to somehow compensate for the damage?" I shook my head. "Just make sure Diego understands that actions have consequences. That's the only lesson that matters now." Meanwhile, Carolina had moved into her sister Luz's house in a small apartment on the other side of town. Luz sent me a private message on Friday. "Andres, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but Carolina is doing very badly. She barely eats, she cries all day. I'm worried about her mental state." I replied, "Luz, I appreciate you worrying about your sister, but she created this situation. The pain she's feeling now is a direct consequence of months of lies and betrayal. She needs to face it, not avoid it." Luz replied, "I know. I'm furious with her too, but she's still my sister and I'm scared." That conversation made me pause for the first time in weeks. I didn't want Carolina to harm herself despite everything she had done. I wrote to Luz, "If you truly believe she's in danger of harming herself, take her to a professional. A therapist can help her process this in a healthy way, but I can't be that person for her. That door is permanently closed." Luz thanked me and promised she would seek professional help for Carolina. It was the best I could do in those circumstances, without getting emotionally involved. Diego tried one last desperate approach. That same Friday, he showed up at the building where I now lived, waiting for me in the lobby. The doorman called me before letting him up. "Mr. Romero, "There's a man here who says he's your friend. Do you want me to let him pass?" I asked him to describe the person and confirmed it was Diego. "No, thanks. Tell him there's nothing we need to discuss." I heard over the phone as the doorman relayed my message to Diego, followed by Diego's voice, pleading, "Please, just 5 minutes. I need to explain." The doorman repeated that I had declined the visit and asked him to leave the building. That night, lying in my new apartment, which was smaller but infinitely more honest than the house I had shared with Carolina, I reflected on the last 2 weeks. I had lost an 8-year marriage and a 15-year friendship, but I had gained something more valuable: clarity about who the people in my life really were. The masks had fallen, loyalties had been tested, and I had emerged stronger, more aware, more in control of my destiny than ever before. The divorce process was moving quickly thanks to my lawyer's efficiency and the lack of shared assets to complicate things. Carolina had signed the papers without resistance, probably because she knew she had no legal basis to claim anything. The house was never ours. It was a lease in my name. The car was in my name. The bank accounts contained money I had earned. She had nothing to fight for in legal terms. She was only left with the weight of her decisions and the shame of facing the consequences. A month after discovering the infidelity, my life had taken a completely different turn. The divorce was practically finalized. Only a few minor bureaucratic procedures were left. I had started attending therapy not because I felt emotionally destroyed, but because I wanted to process what I had been through in a healthy way. My therapist, Dr. Marquez, helped me understand that my controlled and methodical reaction wasn't coldness, but necessary self-protection. "Many people in your situation act impulsively," he explained. "You chose to protect yourself intelligently. There's nothing wrong with that." During those sessions, I discovered something important about myself. For years, I had prioritized the comfort of others over my own happiness. I worked long hours to maintain a lifestyle that primarily benefited Carolina. I tolerated Diego monopolizing conversations and decisions in our group of friends because I valued harmony over my own preferences. I had built my identity around being the reliable husband, the loyal friend, the responsible provider. But no one had ever asked me what I really wanted. And worse, I had never asked myself that question. "What do you want to do with your life now, Andres?" Dr. Marquez asked me during a session in mid-March. The question caught me off guard. "I guess keep working, rebuild my life, eventually meet someone new." He smiled slightly. "Those are standard answers. I'm asking you, what do you want? Not, what are you expected to want? What would make you genuinely happy?" I was silent for a long time before answering. "I don't know. It's been so long since I've thought about it that I honestly don't know." That conversation led me to make changes I had postponed for years. I had always wanted to travel, but Carolina hated flying and preferred predictable local vacations. I booked a 2-week trip to Portugal, a place that had always fascinated me. I had wanted to learn to play the guitar since I was a teenager, but I never found the time. I signed up for classes on Saturday mornings. Small decisions that seemed insignificant, but that represented the reclaiming of my own life. Meanwhile, the consequences for Carolina and Diego continued to unfold. Carolina had managed to increase her hours at the clothing store where she worked, but her salary was barely enough to contribute to the rent at her sister Luz's apartment. Her lifestyle had changed drastically. She could no longer afford the outings to expensive restaurants I used to pay for. She no longer had access to the shared credit card she used freely. The economic reality of her decisions manifested in every aspect of her new life. Her mother, Mrs. Patricia, called me again 3 weeks after our last conversation. "Andres, I know I have no right to ask you this, but Carolina is struggling financially. Would there be any possibility you could give her a little temporary help while she finds stability?" The request surprised me with its audacity. Mrs. Patricia, with all due respect, Carolina is an adult woman capable of working. The consequences of her actions include taking financial responsibility for herself. "That's not my problem or my responsibility. But you were married for 8 years, she insisted. Surely that means something." I took a deep breath before replying. "Mrs. Patricia, those 8 years meant everything to me. I honored them with fidelity, hard work, and complete dedication. Carolina chose to destroy that. She owes me no loyalty, but I don't owe her anything now either. If she needs financial support, she can ask Diego for it, who was an accomplice in the destruction of our marriage." There was an awkward silence before she said, Diego doesn't have any money either. He lost his job because of you. That last sentence revealed what she really thought. To her, I was the villain in this story for having exposed the consequences of their actions. Diego lost his job because of his own decisions. I corrected her firmly. He repeatedly lied to his employer about his location during work hours. I only provided truthful information when requested. If that resulted in his dismissal, it's because the company valued honesty more than he did. Mrs. Patricia tried to argue more, but I ended the conversation politely. I'm sorry you're in this situation, but my answer is no. Take care. Diego, for his part, was facing his own battles. Roberto informed me that Diego had applied for jobs at several marketing companies in the city, but the industry was small and rumors travel fast. When HR managers called for professional references, they discovered the circumstances of his dismissal. Using work time for extramarital encounters was not the kind of history that inspired confidence in potential employers. His professional reputation was severely damaged. I heard that Diego finally got a job at a much smaller marketing agency with a significantly lower salary than he had before. His new boss was someone who wasn't connected to our professional circle and apparently didn't thoroughly investigate his history. But even with that job, Diego was struggling financially. He had accumulated debts from his months without employment. His lifestyle had been expensive when he had a good salary, and now he faced the reality of having to cut expenses drastically. The most interesting thing was what happened between Carolina and Diego after everything collapsed. Roberto, who maintained marginal contact with both despite my warning to choose his loyalties carefully, told me that the relationship between them had disintegrated quickly. They blame each other, Roberto told me during a casual encounter at a coffee shop. Carolina says Diego seduced and manipulated her. Diego says Carolina was the one who pursued him first. Are they still together? I asked with morbid curiosity. Roberto shook his head. They broke up 2 weeks ago. Apparently, they had a horrible fight where they said terrible things to each other. Carolina called him a coward for not defending their relationship publicly. Diego told her she was a financial burden he couldn't support. They ended up hating each other as much as they probably hated you at the beginning. There was a poetic justice in that. The relationship they had built on betrayal and lies had collapsed under the weight of its own consequences. But what really revealed the character of both was what happened when each tried to rebuild their social life. Carolina tried to approach old friends, the same ones who had seen my message explaining the infidelity. Most of them rejected her. One of them, Marcella, sent me a message telling me. Carolina called me crying, saying she needed support during this difficult time. I told her what she did was unforgivable and that I didn't want to be friends with someone capable of such betrayal. She hung up furiously, saying I was a bad friend. Diego faced similar rejection from our group. The friends we had shared for 15 years, who had known him as the loyal and trustworthy guy, now saw him in a completely different light. When he tried to attend a casual group gathering one Friday night, the discomfort was so evident that he left after 20 minutes. Roberto told me. Nobody talked to him directly. Conversations died when he approached. He finally got the hint and left. It was brutal, but honestly, he deserved it. As the weeks went by, I began to notice something interesting in my own emotional transformation. The initial pain of the betrayal was being replaced by something healthier. Indifference. It wasn't that I had forgiven Carolina or Diego, they just stopped mattering to me. They were closed chapters of my life, people I once knew, but who no longer had any relevance in my present or future. That indifference was liberating in a way that anger never could be. My work also improved remarkably. Without the emotional burden of maintaining a false relationship, I could focus completely on projects that had previously seemed overwhelming. I received an offer to lead a major audit of a multinational company, a project that could significantly raise my professional profile. I accepted without hesitation. The old Andres would have consulted with Carolina first, worrying about how the long hours would affect our time together. The new Andres made decisions based solely on what was best for his career and well-being. During my trip to Portugal, something unexpected happened. I met a Brazilian woman named Beatriz on a wine tour through the Douro Valley. She was a freelance translator traveling alone after finishing a long project in Lisbon. We talked for hours about travel, books, music. There was no immediate romantic chemistry, but there was a genuine connection of friendship. We exchanged contacts and stayed in touch. After we each returned to our respective countries, Beatrice became a kind of mirror that showed me how different a human relationship could be when it was based on mutual honesty. She knew about my recent divorce because I told her openly during our conversations. She shared with me about her own difficult breakup 2 years ago. There were no pretenses between us. There were no social masks to maintain. It was refreshing to have a friendship that existed on its own terms without historical complications or predetermined future expectations. Meanwhile, back in everyday reality, the divorce was finally officially completed in April. I received the final documents. On a rainy Tuesday, my lawyer congratulated me. This was one of the cleanest divorces I've ever handled, with no property disputes, no custody battles, no endless legal drama. You handled this very intelligently from the beginning. I thanked him and filed the documents in a folder. That chapter was officially closed. That night, organizing papers in my apartment, I found an old photograph of Carolina and me on our first anniversary. We were smiling in front of an elegant restaurant, her arms around my waist, my expression full of adoration for her. I looked at that photo for a long time, trying to reconnect with the man I had been then. That Andres believed he had found his soulmate. That Andres worked tirelessly to build a shared future. That Andres never imagined that the woman in the photo was capable of betraying him so cruelly. I didn't feel sadness looking at that image. I felt something more complex. Gratitude. Gratitude because I now knew the truth. Gratitude because I had discovered the betrayal before having children with Carolina, before buying a house together, before intertwining our lives even more deeply. Gratitude because the temporary pain of this experience had taught me lessons about self-worth, personal boundaries, and the importance of surrounding myself with genuinely loyal people. I put the photo in a box with other memories from the past and closed the lid firmly. Spring brought additional changes. I started going out more with colleagues from work, building friendships based on current interests rather than shared history. I joined a hiking group that met on Sundays to explore trails in the nearby mountains. I resumed old hobbies I had abandoned during the marriage, like photography. Slowly, I was building a life that felt authentically mine, not a life designed to please someone else or maintain social appearances. Roberto sought me out one Saturday in mid-May. We had kept our distance since I warned him about choosing his loyalties, but apparently there was something he needed to tell me. We met at a neutral coffee shop. Andres, I need to apologize. He began without preamble. When all this came to light, I didn't understand why you reacted so harshly. I thought you were being vengeful, but I've seen how Carolina and Diego have behaved these months, how they blame each other, how they try to manipulate others into feeling sorry for them. Now I understand you weren't exaggerating. They were genuinely cruel to you. I accepted his apology with a nod. I appreciate you recognizing that, Roberto. I don't need people to take sides, but I do need them to respect that my decisions were justified based on the reality of what I experienced. He nodded seriously. Is there any chance we can be friends like before? I thought about it honestly before answering. Not like before, because before I was a different person. But we can build a new friendship based on who I am now. If that works for you, I'm willing to try. We established a new kind of friendship in the following months. One that was more transparent and less based on maintaining past social dynamics. Roberto respected that certain topics were off limits, mainly any updates on Carolina or Diego, unless it was absolutely relevant to my well-being. It was one of the first relationships I rebuilt on my new terms, an experiment in setting clear boundaries from the beginning. As summer approached, I reflected on the 4 months that had passed since that Tuesday afternoon when I found Carolina and Diego in my bed. The initial devastation had evolved through several stages: shock, pain, strategic anger, implementation of consequences, and finally, liberation. I wasn't the same man I had been. I was someone more aware, more protective of my mental peace, less willing to sacrifice my happiness for the comfort of others. I was someone who was finally learning to prioritize himself without guilt. June arrived with a suffocating heat that seemed to amplify everything. It was during that month that the final consequences of the betrayal reached their climax in a way I hadn't even fully anticipated. It all started with an unexpected call from Fernanda, the HR director from Diego's former company. Andres, I need to talk to you about a delicate matter, she said in a serious voice. We agreed to meet at a discreet coffee shop the next day. When we sat down, Fernanda took out a folder and slid it towards me. After Diego was fired, we conducted a full audit of his work over the last 2 years. It's standard procedure when there's a dismissal for just cause. She opened the folder, revealing financial documents. We discovered significant irregularities in the expense accounts Diego managed. Personal charges disguised as client expenses, inflated invoices where he pocketed the difference, misuse of company funds for personal expenses. We're talking about approximately $45,000 over 18 months. I felt my stomach churn. Are you saying Diego was stealing from the company? Fernanda nodded gravely. Corporate fraud. We have enough evidence to press criminal charges. But before we proceed, I needed to inform you because several of these fraudulent expenses coincide with dates when we know he was with your wife. Expensive dinners, hotel rooms, even jewelry that was apparently reported as gifts for clients, but was never delivered to any client. The revelation left me speechless. Carolina had been using stolen money to fund her affair with Diego. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. Fernanda leaned forward. Because you're going to be contacted by the investigators. They'll need your testimony about the dates, the places, everything you can corroborate about their activities during that period. I also thought you deserved to know before this becomes public. I thanked her for her consideration. Are you going to proceed with the criminal charges? She nodded. The board of directors voted unanimously in favor. This isn't just about the money. It's about sending a message that this type of conduct has serious consequences. 2 weeks later, Diego was arrested. The local news covered the story because the amount was significant and the company was well known in the city. Manager arrested for $45,000 corporate fraud. Read the headline. The public shame Diego faced surpassed everything before. His name was in newspapers, on local news sites online, permanently associated with fraud and theft. His career wasn't just damaged, it was completely destroyed. Carolina called me hysterical when she found out. I had temporarily unblocked her number to speak with the investigators, and she took advantage of it. Andres, you have to help him. Diego is going to prison because of you. Her accusation was so absurd, I almost laughed. Carolina, Diego is going to face legal consequences because he committed a crime. He stole money from his company. I had nothing to do with those decisions. She sobbed uncontrollably. But if you hadn't sent that information to his work, they never would have discovered anything. You ruined his life. The conversation revealed something fundamental about Carolina's character that I had overlooked during our marriage. Her complete inability to accept personal responsibility in her mind. I was the villain for exposing the truths, not her and Diego for creating the situations that destroyed them. Carolina, listen to me very clearly, I said in a controlled voice. Diego chose to steal money. You chose to have an affair with him. I chose to protect myself from both of them. The consequences they're facing now are a direct result of their own decisions, not mine. And if Diego used stolen money to pay for your dinners and gifts, you're also an accomplice to that fraud. The silence that followed was electric. What do you mean? She whispered. I mean the investigators are going to ask you about the gifts Diego gave you, about the dinners they shared, about everything he paid for during their affair. If he used company money for those things, and you knew or should have known, you could face your own investigation. I heard her breathing quicken. I didn't know anything about that. I never asked him where the money came from. Then I suggest you get a good lawyer, Carolina, because this matter goes far beyond a divorce now. I hung up, leaving her in a panic. I didn't feel any particular satisfaction in scaring her, but I needed her to understand the gravity of the situation she and Diego had created. This was no longer about hurt feelings or broken marriages. It was about real crimes with real legal consequences, and they would both have to face that reality without my help or protection. The investigators contacted me a week later. 2 detectives came to my office with a list of detailed questions. Mr. Romero, we understand you discovered an extramarital affair between your wife Carolina Mendoza and the accused Diego Salazar. I confirmed with documentation I had prepared. Photographs with dates and times, bank statements showing charges at the same places where the private investigator had photographed them, text messages corroborating their meetings. Did you ever notice Mr. Salazar seemed to have more financial resources than his salary would justify? Asked one of the detectives. I thought carefully before answering. Diego always lived beyond his means. I assumed he had credit card debt, like many people. I never suspected he was stealing from his employer. The detective noted my response. Did your wife ever mention expensive gifts Mr. Salazar gave her? I shook my head. Carolina and I were emotionally separated during the last months of our marriage without me knowing it. She didn't share details of her personal life with me. The investigation revealed that Diego had spent approximately $18,000 of the stolen money directly on his affair with Carolina. Dinners at expensive restaurants, luxury hotel rooms, a diamond necklace he gave her for her birthday, weekend getaways presented as business trips. Carolina was called to testify about these expenses. According to Roberto, who followed the news obsessively, she admitted to receiving the gifts but swore she believed Diego paid for them with his own legitimate salary. The prosecutor apparently believed her testimony because Carolina was not charged with any crime, but the damage to her reputation was devastating. The news reported that the defendant's mistress received thousands of dollars in gifts purchased with stolen funds. Her name appeared in articles alongside Diego's, identifying her as the married woman with whom Diego had the affair, which partially motivated the fraud. The public humiliation she faced surpassed anything I could have deliberately orchestrated. Carolina's parents, especially her mother, Mrs. Patricia, faced their own social shame. In their conservative circle of friends, having a daughter involved in a scandal of infidelity and fraud was deeply dishonorable. Mrs. Patricia stopped attending her book club, stopped participating in church events. She basically withdrew from social life to avoid the judgmental looks and whispers. Don Hector, Diego's father, had a similar reaction. He withdrew from his Sunday domino group, where he had played for 20 years. Diego's trial was quick. With the overwhelming evidence presented by the company, his own lawyer advised him to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. Diego accepted a plea deal where he admitted to the fraud and committed to paying full restitution of the $45,000 plus interest and damages. The sentence was 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months if he showed good behavior and began paying restitution. The day Diego was sentenced, I was in my office working on the audit project for the multinational company. Roberto sent me a text message. Diego just got 3 years. They took him away in handcuffs from the courthouse. I read the message without any particular emotion. I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction, just a sense of closure. Diego would face real consequences for his decisions. That was the justice the legal system provided, independent of my desire for personal revenge. That night, eating alone in my apartment, I reflected on the full arc of this story. It had started with a painful personal betrayal. It had developed into a calculated separation and protection of my interests, and had culminated in legal consequences I had never sought, but which arose naturally from the decisions Diego had made. My role had simply been to be honest about what I knew when asked. The rest was Diego digging his own grave with increasingly questionable decisions. Carolina tried to contact me one last time after Diego's sentencing. She used email because all her numbers were still blocked. Andres, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that's happened, but I'm desperate. I lost my job at the store because the scandal scared away customers. My family barely speaks to me. I have nowhere to live because Luz says she can't stand the shame of having me in her house anymore. I need help. Please, for the 8 years we spent together, I beg you to consider giving me a chance to start over. I read her email 3 times, analyzing every word. I noticed there was no genuine apology for the betrayal. There was no acknowledgement of the emotional damage she caused me. There were only pleas based on her current need. It was the same pattern she had shown throughout this whole process, victimizing herself while completely ignoring how her actions had impacted others. I wrote a brief and definitive reply. Carolina, I'm sorry you're going through difficulties, but you built this situation with your own decisions. Seek support from the people who participated in creating this mess with you, not from the person you betrayed. I will not reply to any further communication from you. I wish you well in finding a way to rebuild your life, but that rebuilding will not include my participation in any way. I blocked her email address after sending that reply. It was the last direct contact we had. Months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Carolina eventually moved to another city, trying to start over where no one knew her story. She got a job in customer service for a telecommunications company, an entry-level position far below what she had been used to. Her life had changed radically, reduced to the essentials, stripped of the comforts my job had provided for years. Diego, serving his sentence in a minimum security prison, was facing his own reconstruction. According to Don Hector, who visited his son regularly despite the shame, Diego was finally confronting the magnitude of his decisions. For the first time, I think he really understands what he did. Don Hector told me when we ran into each other casually at the supermarket 6 months after the sentencing. Not just to you, Andres, but to himself. He destroyed his career, his reputation, his freedom, and for what? For an affair that didn't even last. I didn't reply to that because words were cheap. Only time and actions would show if Diego had really learned anything. Carolina, according to Marcela, who kept occasional contact with mutual acquaintances, had finally started therapy. Her mother's terminal illness had apparently been the catalyst she needed to face her own problems. I heard she's working on taking responsibility for her actions, Marcela told me over coffee. Her therapist is helping her see the patterns of behavior that led her to make the decisions she made. I was genuinely glad to hear that. Not out of nostalgia, but because it meant that maybe something good had come out of this whole mess. At the end of November, I made an important decision. I accepted a job offer with an international consulting firm that required moving to Buenos Aires, Argentina. The position was a significant promotion, the opportunity to work on high-level audits for multinational companies, and the chance to travel extensively throughout South America. More importantly, it represented a completely new chapter in a city where no one knew my past story. I could just be Andres without the baggage of being the man who was betrayed. Organizing the move was surprisingly easy. I donated or sold most of my belongings, keeping only the essentials and a few sentimental items I truly valued. I notified my landlord with the required notice. I informed close friends of my decision. Everyone understood and supported me. Roberto joked, "You're going to live the successful bachelor life in Buenos Aires. Just make sure you don't forget us when you're completely cosmopolitan." The week before my departure in December, I did something I had been putting off. I visited the grave of the man who had been my mentor in the early years of my career, Mr. Gustavo Herrera. He had passed away 2 years ago, but he had been a father figure to me when I needed it most. Standing in front of his headstone, I spoke to him in a low voice. "Mr. Herrera, I promised you I would live a life you could be proud of. This year tested that promise in ways I never imagined, but I think I managed to keep it. I protected myself without losing my integrity. I imposed consequences without becoming cruel. And now I'm ready for the next chapter. My last day in the city. I organized a farewell dinner at the same restaurant where I had had my anniversary dinner with Dr. Marquez and other close friends months ago. Everyone who had mattered during this transformative year was there. During the toasts, I shared something I had been reflecting on. This year I learned that the end of something, however painful, can be the beginning of something better. Carolina and Diego taught me who I don't want to be. You all showed me who I can become. I'm taking those lessons with me to Argentina. The night ended with hugs, promises to keep in touch, and genuine well wishes. As I drove home for the last time, I passed the building where I had lived with Carolina. The lights were on. New tenants inhabited the space where my marriage had collapsed. I felt a wave of gratitude for everything that had happened, even the painful parts, because they had brought me exactly where I needed to be. The flight to Buenos Aires took off on a sunny Saturday in mid-December. As the plane gained altitude and my city grew smaller and smaller below me, I felt a mix of emotions that was hard to describe. It wasn't exactly nostalgia or regret, but rather an acknowledgement that I was definitively closing one chapter and opening a completely new one. The person who had boarded that plane was fundamentally different from who he had been a year ago. Buenos Aires welcomed me with humid heat and vibrant energy. The company had arranged a temporary apartment for me in Palermo while I looked for something permanent. The first month was a whirlwind of job orientation, exploring the city, adapting to a new rhythm of life. Beatriz came to visit me during the end-of-year holidays, and together we explored the city, discovering hidden bookstores, charming cafes, and milongas where tango was danced until dawn. "How do you feel being here?" Beatriz asked me one night as we had dinner at a Paria in San Telmo. I thought about her question honestly. "Free," I finally replied. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living my life on my own terms, not trying to meet someone else's expectations or maintain an image that isn't authentic." She smiled with understanding. "That's the best revenge possible, you know? Living well." January brought news from the past I had left behind. Mrs. Patricia passed away surrounded by her family. Carolina sent me a brief message informing me, probably because she didn't know who else to tell that mattered from her old life. I replied with genuine condolences. I'm sorry for your loss. Your mother was a remarkable woman. May she rest in peace. I didn't add more because there was nothing more to say. That door was closed, but I could close it with respect. 2 months later, in March, Roberto called me with surprising news. Diego got married to a woman he met in his reintegration program. Apparently, she works as a rehabilitation counselor. The news left me indifferent in a way that confirmed how much I had healed. I hope he learned from his mistakes and treats her better than he treated us. That's all I said. Roberto laughed. That's incredibly mature of you. Carolina had also made changes, I learned, through Marcella, who occasionally sent me unsolicited but appreciated updates. After her mother's death, Carolina apparently had a deep personal crisis that led her to take her therapy more seriously. She had begun to rebuild relationships with her family, particularly with her sister Luz, taking genuine responsibility for the first time for the pain she had caused. She still has a lot of work to do, Marcella told me, but at least she's trying to change. I was glad to hear it, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because it meant something good had come out of all the pain. If Carolina finally learned to be a better person, if Diego had really changed and could build a healthy marriage, then perhaps the devastating consequences they both faced had served a greater purpose. It wasn't my responsibility to forgive them or validate their growth, but I could acknowledge that justice sometimes includes the possibility of redemption for those who genuinely seek it. My life in Buenos Aires flourished in unexpected ways. The work was challenging but rewarding, allowing me to use my auditing skills in complex international cases. I made friends at the office, particularly with an Argentine colleague named Tomas, who became my cultural guide, teaching me the nuances of Rio Platan Spanish and local traditions. On weekends, I explored different neighborhoods, attended concerts, visited museums and galleries that fed parts of me that had been dormant for years. In May, during a corporate event, I met an Uruguayan architect named Lucia. She had come to present designs for the renovation of one of our clients' buildings. We talked during the subsequent cocktail party about architecture, travel, literature. There was an ease in our interaction that reminded me why genuine human connections were worth the risk of vulnerability. I asked for her number before the night was over, and she accepted with a warm smile. The first dates with Lucia were different from anything I had experienced with Carolina. There was honesty from the beginning about our lives, our stories, our expectations. I told her about my divorce without going into dramatic details. She shared about her own difficult breakup 2 years ago, which had led her to move from Montevideo to Buenos Aires. There were no pretenses between us, just two adults genuinely getting to know who each other was. Are you afraid to trust again? Lucia asked me during a dinner in June, months after we started dating regularly. The question was fair and deserved an honest answer. Sometimes, I admitted, but I realized that closing myself off completely would be letting Carolina and Diego win even after everything. They don't deserve that power over my future. So I choose to trust cautiously, to observe patterns, but also to give people the benefit of the doubt until they prove otherwise. Lucia nodded understandingly. I feel the same way. My ex taught me warning signs that I now recognize, but he also taught me that love is worth the risk when it's with the right person. That conversation deepened our connection in significant ways. We weren't looking for perfection in each other, but genuine compatibility, mutual respect, and the willingness to build something authentic together. At the end of July, I received a completely unexpected message. It was from Diego Andres. I know you'll probably delete this without reading, but I need to try. I've been working on my recovery, and part of that is making amends with the people I hurt. I don't expect forgiveness or reconciliation. I just want you to know that I finally fully understand what I did to you. I betrayed your trust in the deepest way possible. I participated in humiliating you with someone who swore to love you, and then I committed crimes that dragged your name into investigations. There's no excuse for any of it. I just wanted you to know that I live with that weight every day and that I'll do my best to be a better person than who I was. So, I read the message several times, analyzing my feelings about it. I didn't feel the anger I would have expected a year ago. I also didn't feel the urge to respond with words of forgiveness I didn't genuinely feel. What I felt was indifference mixed with a slight hope that he was sincere. I decided to reply briefly. Diego, I received your message. I appreciate you taking responsibility. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive what happened, but I wish you genuine success in becoming a better person. That's the best amends you can make, not just to me, but to yourself. There was no further exchange after that, and that was okay. We didn't need to be friends or have a cinematic reconciliation. We just needed to acknowledge that we had both moved on with our lives, taking the lessons of our shared experiences in completely different directions. September marked 2 years since the discovery of the infidelity. This time I didn't organize any commemorative dinner. Instead, I spent a quiet weekend with Lucia at a ranch in the province of Buenos Aires, riding horses through open fields under an infinitely blue sky. I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. From devastation to reconstruction, from pain to peace, from betrayal to cautious but real trust. What are you thinking about? Lucia asked as our horses walked side by side. I smiled, looking at her, about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us end up being gifts in disguise. If Carolina hadn't betrayed me, I'd probably still be in a mediocre marriage, living a life that didn't fully satisfy me. Without ever meeting you, she extended her hand toward mine. So I guess I should thank her in some twisted way. We laughed together as the sun began to set toward the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. In that moment, holding the hand of a woman who truly saw me for who I was, living in a country that had given me a second chance to define myself, working in a career that challenged and satisfied me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pure gratitude for my life exactly as it was. The consequences for Carolina and Diego had been severe and deserved. They had both lost much more than they gained from their betrayal. But the consequences for me, though initially painful, had been transformative in the best possible ways. I had gained clarity about my self-worth. I had developed the strength to set firm boundaries. I had learned to prioritize my happiness without guilt, and I had discovered that the end of a chapter, however traumatic, can be the prologue to something infinitely better. I didn't forgive them completely because forgiveness wasn't necessary for my peace of mind. What I found was something more valuable. Indifference. They no longer occupied emotional space in my life. They were simply people I once knew, who taught me important lessons and who now existed in my past with no power over my present or future. As Lucia and I returned to the ranch at sunset, my phone vibrated with a message from Beatrice, who had finally decided to move to Colombia. "How's the life of the man who completely reinvented himself?" she wrote with a winking emoji. I replied honestly, "It's going exactly as it should. Different from everything I planned, but better than I imagined." That was the fundamental truth of my story. My wife cheated on me with an old friend, so I left. But that departure wasn't an end. It was a liberation, an opportunity to discover who I really was when I wasn't trying to meet the expectations of others or maintain relationships that diminished me. The consequences I imposed weren't cruel revenge, but necessary justice. And the man who emerged on the other side of that experience was stronger, more conscious, and more authentic than who he had been before. Carolina and Diego had to face the loss of everything they had taken for granted. Financial stability, social reputation, strained family relationships, ruined careers, and, above all, the weight of knowing they themselves had created their own destruction. Those weren't consequences I imposed with malice, but natural results of decisions they made freely. I simply removed my protection and allowed reality to do its work. And in the end, that was the most important lesson of all. You don't need to actively destroy those who betray you. You just need to protect yourself, set firm boundaries, and allow the natural consequences of their actions to unfold. Justice is often best served by simply removing yourself from toxic situations and focusing on building something better for yourself. As the sun finally set completely and the first stars began to appear in the Argentine sky, I felt a deep peace. It wasn't the peace of having won some epic battle, but the peace of having chosen my own well-being over drama, my future over my past, and my authentic happiness over the familiar comfort of the known. My wife cheated on me with an old friend, so I left, and in that simple act of leaving, of choosing myself, of demanding the respect I deserved, I found not only justice, but freedom. The freedom to be completely myself, to live on my own terms, and to build a life worth living, not just surviving. That was my true revenge, living well. And looking at it from here, from this place of peace and possibility, I wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that brought me here. What do you think of this story? Have you ever had to make difficult decisions about relationships that hurt you? Do you think Andres handled the situation correctly, or should he have acted differently? Share your opinion in the comments. If this story resonated with you in any way, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel.